the fall 2015 Holloway Poetry Series, Behind the Times. It's going to be a full semester on campus and in town with lots of literary goings-on. I'm Cecil Giscombe, I teach poetry here, and with Jane Gregory, I curate the fall Holloway series. In the Holloway series itself, the next event will be the combination Holloway series Mixed Blood Project visit by the poet Ronaldo Wilson. This will take place on Monday, the 5th of October, so mark your calendars, watch the wall posters. Ronaldo's going to talk at 4 o'clock in room 300. His talk will be, as he says, something in response to the questions posed around expected identity politics, race, and the powerful role of the fictive, humor, and silence. Okay? His reading will be at 6:30 in this room. His reading will be preceded at 6 p.m. by a half-hour performance by the group Positive Knowledge. After the crosstalk color composition event in June, I figured this room and the Holloway series needed a little music. So we're doing that this semester. On the 22nd of October, that's a Thursday, Srikanth Chiku Reddy will read. He'll also speak at 4 p.m. in this room. That is, he's going to deliver the Bagley Wright Lecture. His talk is titled The O of Wonder, a Syzygy. And it's about, as he says, about the history of wonder in the Western poetic tradition from Homer to Milton to Ronald Johnson. That's on the 22nd of October. His reading at 6:30 will be preceded by a half hour with the saxophonist and founding member of the Rova Saxophone Quartet, Larry Oakes. On the 11th of November, Ray Armantrout will read. She's the winner of both the National Book Critics Circle Award and the Pulitzer Prize for her book of poetry, Versed, which was also nominated for the National Book Award. We're still working on the music for her appearance. I would be remiss if I did not mention the offerings of our companion series, Lunch Poems. The Lunch Poem series, curated by Robert Hass with the assistance of Giovanni Singleton and Lillian Berger, takes place on the first Thursday of every month from 12:10 to 12:50 in the Morrison Library, which is itself in the Doe Library. John Shoptaw, who is here tonight, will read on the 1st of October. Toy Derricott will read on the 5th of November, and Greg Hardlow will read on the 3rd of December. And on Saturday, the 26th of December, will occur the 20th annual Watershed Environmental Poetry Festival. And that's going to be, correct me if I'm wrong, from noon until 5 p.m., is that correct?
Noon to 4:30.
Noon to 4:30, okay. And this is the poster. There are posters available for free. Take one, take a couple, post them around town. That's the 26th of September. It will be held at the Martin Luther King Jr. Civic Center Park in Berkeley at 2151 Martin Luther King Jr. Way. The poets reading in that will be Robert Hass, Brenda Hillman, Jane Mead, Francisco Alarcon, John Shoptaw, and myself. Posters are available, as I just said, on the book table. We thank our friends from University Press Books, the independent book store on Bancroft Way, for providing books for sale. Buy a book. Jane Gregory has volunteered to sell books this evening. And tonight the faculty, the poetry faculty at the University of California, will read, and we're going to read in alphabetical order. I'm going to make one introduction at this time for all of us in that order, and alphabet dictates that I'm first. I'm Cecil Giscombe. I teach courses here in poetry and nonfiction. My small book, Ohio Railroads, for sale over there. It's a poem in essay form, and there'll be some sort of launch of it on Thursday night, the day after tomorrow at Moe's. My book of essays about poetry, Border Towns, will appear in May of 2016. Robert Hass's most recent books are The Apple Trees at Olima, Poems, and What Light Can Do, which is essays. Hejinian is the author most recently of The Book of 1,000 Eyes, and in collaboration with Carla Harriman, The Wide Road. Her next book of poetry, The Unfollowing, will be published by Omnidon. Geoffrey G. O'Brien is the author most recently of People on Sunday, Metropole, and Green and Gray. He is the co-author with John Ashbery and Timothy Donnelly of Three Poets. His 28-sonnet poem about police violence has just come out in the Paris Review. John Shoptaw is the author most recently, and he writes relievedly, of Times Beach, a book of poems on the Mississippi River watershed, which won the Notre Dame Review Book Prize. His published poems in the New Yorker and his poetry and prose are forthcoming in Poetry magazine. Well, I'm up here, and I'm first in the alphabet, so I'll start. I want to start by reading something not by me, but by Kenneth Irby. Kenneth Irby was born in 1936, and he died on July 30th of this year. He was a visionary poet. The poet Ed Dorn, in a poem kind of sort of about John Wayne, declared one day he saw John Wayne gesturing at Kansas, the state of Kansas, and saying, "Someday that'll all be Ken Irby." He was a great poet. He was a student at Berkeley in the 1960s, and he is one of the first poets that I ever met. I met him in 1971 or 1972. We stayed in touch since then. I'm going to read you a poem of his called Two Fragments for Bill Dodd. The loneliness of West Texas, as Ed Dorn said, like the love of death. The loneliness the man had. Cattlemen came on, wandering east of Las Vegas with the staked plains, was not of the people missing, but of the endless, eventless landscape, where what few rises there are give only onto the same repeated vista as before. And to be born there is what you look for, out any gaze, and the stretch clear on through, out the back of the head. Tulia, Mule Shoe, Dimmet, Floydata, Level Land, Plainview, Whiteface, Meadow, Crosbyton, Spur, La Mesa, Bovina, Friona, Paducah, Dawn. Good night. And I will read you, I'm still a traveler. I'm still the road still calls me. I'm still a long distance cyclist. I went back through my journals, and there's a group of travel poems that I'm putting together. I'm going to read you two of them. The first, 1980. Popping my peas, I'm sorry. Pushed up from the south on the Seaway Trail, New York State, Route 3, along Lake Ontario, crossing newly built bridges over its feeder creeks, a water level route, east shore of the lake, dead kingfisher above one creek, deep blue of the bird, even in death, tangled in monofilament, itself pale blue, the bird hanging in that from a cable over the water. Crisp October days, 1980. Minor repair, a cleverly made T-shaped support to keep the rack from pressing on the brake cables, apparently a common problem, at Crown City Cycles in Cortland. Rode later up South Salina Street in Syracuse, the old neighborhood, coming through just past dark, past Sal's Birdland, a chicken shack, and the Jerusalem Grocery, Eddie's Barbershop, South Side. The first is always sweetest. When I came finally into Montreal, I came in on Lake Shore Drive in Westmount, and then came further in along Rue Bord du Lac in light snow. First view of the St. Lawrence from the town of Hammond. Lines of green fields below me, almost plains of green, intersecting fields less than long, thin fields in shades of green and yellow, stacked below where I paused to rest. Gently sloped hill trees at the bottom between the grass and the water had observed the first night that everything translates into known quantities, or what one knows of quantities. Noted as I went further in the trip itself that because I had no familiarity with or even knowledge of the territory, I fell back on the fact of distance. How I knew, say, what 10 miles was. Perhaps this is obvious. The boys at Crown City had opera on the radio. Crossed into Canada on the Oberg Bridge, toll waived. Had followed a triangle road to Chippewa Bay. Vision incident. A child's voice taunted me with a cliché concerning death and the seasons. An auditory hallucination. Also in Hammond. Deep blue sky. Not for the last time. Had been warned about Hammond. But what can you do? Not go. And going to 1987, Oxford to Bangor, about Wales. On the way to Bangor, I trailed a slow-moving rain, keeping just behind it, coming again and again to stretches of wet pavement. At Chipping Campden, I tried to call home, Oxford then, from the Tourist Information Center. The line in Oxford was engaged. Graham Greene rode Stamboul train in Chipping Campden. The whole shebang was a perpetual pale slant, a mistake I'd been thinking for a while, to have located myself here on such an island of roads and so few wild animals. Faithless, said the woman at the counter, she's forgotten you. England was a verdant suburb, a glass of water. I'm going all the way, Greene had choral muster say, meaning Istanbul. Later, I'd come to Stratford from Long Compton with a man and a woman I'd met, all of us, on bicycles, and we stopped at her house for tea in the garden. She sang part of a song of 6 witches on a hay cart on Long Compton Hill. Later, at dusk, I found a hotel, and in the morning, from the kitchen, Joan Baez sang Farewell Angelina on the radio. More rain came. In a light rain, past Bit Wells, I went around a woman in an old Saab, parked half on the pavement. She looked like my lover of 6 years earlier, in whose bed on the sleeping porch that overlooked a long lake I had taken so much pleasure. All our clothes so often on the floor around the wide-mouthed Orca vase. And there was also her fearlessness and her old Volvo, painting in the car's front seat. We'd come down the hill from Long Compton behind a road grater. Shall we overtake? The woman said, and we swung out then. And I'll read one more. Poem in 3 sections, dedicated to my friend, old friend, Tom Merwin, still living. 3 for Tom Merwin. Ithaca, New York poems. 3 for Tom Merwin. 1, upstate. Dear friend, compare and contrast. In the staff's imagination, I became a priest. We're all innovative poets here, someone said later. That year, I watched the year pass a single window. One day would turn into the range of others without significant embarrassment. Play your horn in the shadow, I thought. Roll your horn through the light. I could have made a list of the best songs as long as my arm. Order was best. Luck, I learned, was how this or that series of gaps, for example, could make shape shimmer. Too late to turn back now, I figured, if you see what I mean. You said, A little quiet goes a long way. My luck held all through the time I worked upstate. Snow came and snow went, and if I wished, I could put the kibosh on approach. Being opaque, mouth stuck out. Little did I know that I was lucky by my nature and that there's a range to order that's even wider and luckier. I knew one could go to the devil or go down to the state forests and brood on the inevitable. All permission being as equal as forgiveness, all dogs ranging, all dogs being scavengers. Calculate tomorrow, brother man. Laugh up your sleeve, said the staff. It was as though death could be possibly as various as the reasons for leaving Ithaca for good. How one could go and fearlessly to the weather. Such luck, such a bankroll. 2. Uptown. Acting the fool over deaths from a different scale of vernacular. Tisking permission, the green man arches his brow. Fire up on the west side, say 107th Street, and you and Gus and Ellen and I watched, looking in, as it were, from Broadway. In the shower of sparks, kindness is easy to call in or limit. Watch for me by firelight, darling. It's true, but it's a fact, something I knew about. Only one engine. The colored man has integrity. No more than half drunk by nighttime and had haunted the river earlier in the day and observed stuff floating at its surface. Ellen said fire was the worst, meaning of her fears. In my mood, goodwill suffered anger, like two dogs. The fire, we always knew, was what would really judge you. Like it or not, it's as though certainty had been part of the evening's crowd. Too hot for poems. The scene was ghastly quiet. Taxicabs whizzed by behind us. Have mercy, darling, on the big road. And then we four did the ghost walk. We burned shoe leather, like the colored poet had said, up Broadway itself. It's divided there, of course, north and south lanes on either side of a green sward, a veritable Dixie Drive, but that's stretching. But some folks say that a fire won't steal in. What's the adequate response? How long have we got? The staff wanted to know to change the poem's direction. There are reasons for everything. The fire's close, darling, always. I'm the truck and the flame both, said the colored poet. Not the water, neither the river, nor the riverside of anything. Death is like money in the bank. 3. Downtown. Unsure of what question to ask when we, Ellen, sitting between us, were at the bar at Peter McManus's. Big fellow came into the subway car, he said, punching the windows till they broke. Girlfriend or someone holding onto his back, riding him down the aisle, as it were, yelling, stop. But the average person in New York, you said, is happier than the average person upstate. What sees you before you could possibly see or even sense it sizing you up? Forget it, you said, like it wasn't even there. Note to staff, one's imagination fails at the worst times. Check the odds, you said. Later, I wondered, how far were we in functional downtown in this mess from Negro Mountain? Weather comes over the mountains. Oh boy, dear friend. Oh boy. Oh boy. Thank you. Robert Hess.
Thank you, Cecil. Wonderful work. So I'm going to read newish things, not maybe quite finished. This doesn't have a title. Probably it should be not a poem, not an elegy in a season of elegies. And the setting is the Mediterranean southern shore in Portugal. They built shallow ponds in the wetlands all along the Mediterranean shore to rot fish in and make a condiment. It has a name which escapes me. 2,000 years after, there was a trail through the checkerboard of levees made by the dikes, star thistle and artichoke thistle edging them. In southern Portugal one summer, I jogged early before the onset of the god's anvil of the heat of mid-July. Beach in the distance where the Romans must have hauled their triremes up. There was a slight breeze off the sea, and down the shore a flock of flamingos browsing the marsh, and in a pine above the golf course a nesting stork. Galway Canal was alive then, and I think Oakley Hall was alive then. Jimmy Hillman was alive then, and the occasion for my being there, saying to myself and to Thomas Solomon, who I often talked to in my head and who was alive then, and probably in Ljubljana. But there were occasions when I spoke to him despite his absence and our only casual acquaintance, and this was one of them. Thomas owned a boat once in Dubrovnik, was partners in a boat which I had the impression they leased to smugglers who brought in costume jewelry from department stores in Italy to avoid customs and peddled in the morning market of the square in Ljubljana, or sold them to the woman's accessory buyer for the department stores and got a piece of the markup. This to be taken with a grain of salt or a dollop of fermented fish sauce, garum, that's the name. Since I didn't hear the story directly from Thomas and was more or less drunk when I heard it from someone else, part of the Shalamunian legend, Thomas, I said to myself, weaving my way among the salt ponds, I'm weaving my way among salt ponds outside Faro, ancient Roman salt ponds still almost intact. There are guys harvesting clams just down the shore, and a flock of blush-colored intertidal birds not even a technicolor Giacometti could have invented. And there is a stork, Thomas, nesting in a tree in the golf course. I have no idea what storks mean to Europeans in some of the picture books of my childhood, though. They built nests in chimneys, which gave the villages a sleepy, smoky, peaceful feeling. Since we're the same age, you must also have sucked your thumb and studied pictures of storks dozing in twiggy nests in a Europe where not much of anything ever happened. And as your mother turned the pages, that's what I would say. Sitting nests, these creatures for 50 million years. Thomas, I remember you saying that in your opinion, all bakers should be taught to sing. It stands to reason, I think you said, and I was impressed that you had mastered that English idiom. Of course we stand to reason and lie down to dream. It would have made the dough rise. Thomas, they should have lit fires in little paper boats in the harbor in Dubrovnik when you died. When Galway died, the earth should have groaned. It should have, as the man said, loosed lions in the civil streets. When Mark Strand died, the stars should have traded small, ironic witticisms in a language wholly unintelligible to us, but glittering. For Oakley, we should have decommissioned every dam on the Colorado River and floated a sleek white kayak through all its turnings, from above the Glen Canyon to the Gulf, trailing after it a long, self-erasing sentence of a wake, and thrown a party somewhere after on the Baja shore. No metaphors yet for Jimmy Hillman, my father-in-law. He's still in my head, belongs to being a vigorous, generous man, hungry for life at 93. That summer in Faro, he was showing his children a world he'd come to love. He was a farm boy from the pine woods of southeast Mississippi and came to be a man who loved the world. He loved speaking Portuguese, walking his sons and daughter through the ramparts of old fortresses and the mosques of the Algarve. He was a little amused by our interest in cuisines, having grown up on grits and red-eyed gravy because that was what there was on a Depression farm in Mississippi in 1933. And because one of his earliest memories was the odor of his father and brother rinsing excrements from the guts of a slaughtered pig. He was, as an old man, mad about writing, and he'd written about that smell and the squealing and the blood. But he knew the restaurant in Faro where branzino was roasted whole and stuffed with rice and raisins and something they did with lemon and cinnamon and garlic. He's dead now 3 weeks. By the time he left the table, he knew the names of the 4 children of the waitress and their ages. This was after he had ordered coffee for us and the beautiful green pears the Arabs 1400 years ago had brought from Damascus to plant in Al-Andalus. So I guess that's also a travel poem, Cecil, and it made me think of I'm going to go ahead and try to read a travel poem. I've also been mining. So this is also impossible subject. I have notes full of all the academic conferences I've ever sat through, taking notes in order to stay awake, you know. So this is called Notes from the Conference on Peace. Early Saturday morning, the campus in a little town just outside Seoul. Having arrived in the dark, wakened, walked outside, and the morning was a shock. The whole landscape in the sharp, clear air, bright blue sky, brilliant color in all the trees, golds of beech and chestnut, shiny yellows of the ginkgos, flame red carmine and scarlet of the maples, and an orange red of some other, maybe a horse chestnut. Anyway, Picasso's palette, a mix of gold, flame orange, new copper, old brass. Just stunning, and mixed among the dark green of conifers, which were like brush paintings of conifers, and beyond them the college buildings, modernist versions of traditional Korean architecture, the hills around it, more subdued, orange-brown, green and umber, a little mist rising from the night damp in the crown of the trees at the top of the hill. So gorgeous, I felt exhilarated and slightly nauseous just walking down the path. Also broad lawns and the dramatic Korean magpie, the gachi, a crow-sized blackbird with white sides and a dark, lustrous blue streak the length of its wings, and a loud cry like the turning of a rusty crank. In half an hour's walk, an egret on a pond, a bird that looks like a European coal tit flitting through the pines, some medium-sized bird with scimitar of orange around its eye and a high-pitched song, a pair of wild pigeons or doves, brown-gray, fidgeting through the tobacco gold of the chestnuts, markings on the back of their heads with the look of tessellated tilework or scales. And the most beautiful thing, besides the yellow ginkgo leaves on the path and the smear of ginkgo nuts, putrid smelling, I've read, but I had a bad cold and couldn't smell them, which I'd later seen people gathering on the road for breakfast at the hotel, a rice gruel with ginkgo nuts. The most beautiful thing is the bare persimmon tree, seen uphill against the sky, a fretwork of bare branches, and randomly, depending from the branches, the bright orange balls of the persimmons, and occasionally, as in some insanely intense Tang Dynasty painting, one of the gachis, black and white and blue, inside the branches of the tree. Breathe the air. The country destroyed almost entirely by war 50 years ago. Cities reduced to rubble, near starvation in the villages, women making a broth of wild grasses every morning to keep the children from rickets. The struggle for control of this country after the Japanese were expelled made Korea the star pawn of the Cold War, which visited on this country the full insane fury of mid-20th century aerial bombardment. So of course they would be holding an international conference on peace. Guy Sorman, French columnist, economist, first speaker. Conflicts are always driven by the quest for power. Ideology is the rationale for why the actors deserve power, a rationale always radiant to the person or the group that espouses it. Professor Waugh, civilization is a victory of persuasion over force. A gray-haired man, swept-back hair, prominent nose, looked like an angry goose. Let us imagine the slow overlapping of cultures that live together and apart, borrowing from each other, common interests preserving them from war. Sounds like a description of marriage, the woman next to me muttering. The world is unfinalizable. The Angry Goose says, an English translation of a Korean translation of a neologism from the Russian of Bakhtin. Culture is not harmony, it is disagreement short of violence. This is also, according to Gadamer, the soul of hermetics. Tea break, flurry of young women in white shirts and black bow ties scurry in to this almost entirely male gathering with trays of porcelain teapots and plates of almond cookies. Chat with a very beautiful American wife of the Korean professor of the philosophy of science. She's from Kansas, looks like an aging Catherine Deneuve. Their daughter, named Holly, introduced to me as a young poet, looks like any American kid until she asked me if I thought Rilke's sonnets to Orpheus should be translated into English rhymed or unrhymed. I asked her if she was enjoying the day, and she said, looking me in the eye, it's the most thrilling day of my life. After that, I kept seeing and hearing through my imagination of her eyes, kept imagining the world as a simultaneous narrative of everything that happens from an infinitely nuanced and overlapping sets of points of view. A very beautiful and slightly world-weary woman from the Middle West married to an academic in Korea. What is that movie? The French economist thinking his ironic thoughts in French, the Korean angry goose thinking his in Korean, their daughter's carefully lacquered, vaguely gothic-y nails, the various world, unaccountable finally, that the headphones and the simultaneous translations seem to mimic. In the afternoon, philosophers on the relevance of Confucianism, an old professor from Beijing, Confucian thought had only a sense of hierarchy and not a sense of otherness. Class consciousness could other Confucian thought and give it dynamism. White hair cut short, a baggy suit, a sense that everything he was saying was vastly humorous. A slick, earnest Japanese professor from Narita with heavy black frame glasses, very expensive suit, an expert on communication among national scientific bureaucracies. I looked to see if Holly was listening. She seemed enchanted. And finally, the Korean professor, her father, who had the impassive face of a man who had sat through many symposia and kept his own counsel, delivered a very chiseled, acutely written talk on whether some apparently controversial 19th century Confucian philosopher was pro or anti-science, the subtext of which seemed to be that science was always a progressive force until governments took an interest in it when they thought it could improve the ways of controlling or killing people. Delivered not with an air of cynicism, but as if he were a middle manager making a routine factual report in the late afternoon. I took a walk during the break. The sun had come out and there had been that morning the light as dust of snow and the golden autumn of the red hills. I decided to skip the panel on the Korean New Wave in film and get a cab back to the hotel. Holly was coming down the path. I said goodbye. She shook my hand and said, "We've got to think of a way to world peace." She was wearing a blue turquoise quilted down coat and a sky blue scarf, and we were standing under one of those starry-leaved maples that made a russet stain on the pond. The Iranian professor, she fished out her notebook to get the quotation right, says, "It is God's will that we are different from each other. Do you believe that?" I asked her what she believed, and she looked savage. If there is a God and this is his world, then everything is God's will. Hiroshima was God's will. The AIDS epidemic in Africa is God's will. I said, "And that's what you believe?" She consulted her notebook and said, "I believe what Professor Wu said," and she read it to me. "We are no safer than the most vulnerable among us," and traipsed off down the path. Tomorrow, a plane back to Iowa City, 2 days of clearing out, and then the drive to Berkeley. In 5 days, I'd be in a breakfast room of a motel in Kearney, Nebraska or someplace, drinking the local idea of coffee and peeling the paper lid of one of those individually wrapped plastic bowls of cornflakes. American news in the newspapers, life a set of Russian dolls or Chinese boxes, and myself a facet on a prism so multifaceted it is for all practical purposes infinite. A sign hanging above the coffee machine that says the wind energy advocates would be meeting this afternoon in the Willicather room. So in the final little piece, is for the poets, for the young poets. Watching the young poets in the early evening, smoking on the steps of the terrace outside the poetry reading, I had suddenly the idea that there would be a smoking terrace in heaven. I have a friend dead now, a believing Catholic who was unimpressed by the prospect of paradise until he discovered a great group of medieval theologians who had proposed that there was a kind of time in eternity. They gave it a Latin name. Like my friend, they couldn't conceive of a God who would force them to live forever without sunrise or sunset. His wife, a cynic, called it decaffeinated time, and he shrugged wryly at that and hung on to the idea which seemed to make him happy. He's been dead now for almost a decade, so I suppose he knows one way or the other. The smoking terrace would of course be out of doors, so it wouldn't be as depressing as those smoking rooms in airports where people with grey skin submit to their addiction with religious humility. You could light up and walk to the edge of the clouds and watch the decaffeinated sunset. It made me wonder if there was coffee in heaven, or sex. I knew a woman who said that the main reason for sex, as far as she was concerned, was the cigarette afterward. And if there were sex in heaven, why would there be anything else? Probably so that you could also watch Canada geese settle on a lake just as the moon was twilighting the surface of the water in luminous little scallops. The young poets should read Allen Ginsberg, who said that poets should set an example by not submitting to what he called the nicotine haze of capitalism. Probably in the heaven without tobacco, the couples are walking by the sea, having already made love, and the moon is just coming up, almost unnaturally large, and the color of the moon on the water is just like what their bodies are feeling, contented but still tingling. And in the moonlight, they can see a pack of feral goats on a hillside with their inhuman eyes grazing and looking down at them, also contentedly, as if time and eternity were the wrong ideas altogether. And the women would have come in with their Greek masks on to walk the shoreline and dance what fate is. Thank you. Lynn.
Well, those are hard acts to follow. Thanks for organizing this, Cecil and Jane. Thanks to all of you for coming. I'm going to read, I guess, these are elegies, and I want to dedicate tonight's reading of them. They're not sad, though. Some of them are very funny, but grief is strange. Anyway, I want to dedicate my part of the reading to the memory of Kenneth Irby. Cecil and I have sufficient age difference that I first met Ken, also the first poet I ever met, but 10 years before Cecil did. Ken Irby and I were like poets since he was a grad student, I was an undergrad, until he died. And he was a wonderful person, a wonderful poet. And the volume that Cecil read from Vast, The Intent On, is newly published and a real wonder. Okay, this is from the project, The Unfollowing, that is going to come out early next year. Every minute proves that reality is conditional. Sounds paddle the air, echoing when I speak my mind. The door opens. I rise naked from the tub. It's strange to return to Abyssinia by train from my bed. I hear a demographer singing below. Sleep? Yes, I sleep in fear almost of the lovely night before I slept. Boom, one, 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 boom, one, and boom, one, and one, and one. A woman appears, carrying a pink bag. You stay, okay with the sheets. We'll get a suit, you're in the story. When love can't be composed any better, then love can't be postponed any longer. Things predicted are always restricted. Go, smoking pan, with your bacon to a window. This afternoon there will be une grande séance, and everyone will nap. All that the girl thought irrelevant was never to become relevant to her. At the far left in the upper corner, we can see the Blessed Islands. At the bottom to the right, it says, the end. I am horrified. He has been shot. I see the blood on his hands and head. But now I see that the victim isn't who I thought it was. He has turned to beseech me, but it's just some blonde stranger. I don't care a bit about him and walk away. Time's retraction brings the failure of action. Elbow, richness, auburn, critic, water rising through the plumbing system. Anomalies cannot provide. No dummies, they were experiencing. Then experiences ceased. A scream from within a circle of chairs, an ascending of stairs, and then the scream's cancellation, all accomplished without any screaming. A sphinx, a grid, and a cyclist in red. It was a warm day, March 8, and the co-ed had sweat on her lip, a foretaste of spring. Knowledge is lost in redundant unexpectedness. A field, a flash of emergence, the present, new ideals. A moan. An elf with so many toes on her foot, bam, bam, that she couldn't wear boots, damn, damn, stepped into hot coals, ram, ram. One spring the wise guys booming one paraded, boom, I. The next thing they knew, it was a warm day in spring and each had several deaths to mourn. Is this another Sphinx trick? A hole? A minus device like a mad wave? Up go the shades, but there's no light outside to be let in. She concentrated for, she identified in, she told to. They who accomplish banging gather, they who diminish do so proudly. Half is done with a quarter to spend by a worrywart wearing sunglasses. The sun is too coherent. The egg in the glacier hatches out mice. Mother, as generous as a caterpillar, she has given her very body away. Now we witness with the senses, and materiality is singled out. Mad manifest squares, the semantics of an evil activity. The phrase, this stream among wolves. How vulgar the vulnerability of the ear holes, the armholes, of anything that serves as a window of the body to the world. A drowned or drowning baby is being dragged up through the lake by 1 foot, scales of sound still to study. Predicate without prepositions, subject supposedly shown. Everywhere manifestation, nowhere explanation. Across the wide rivers, a stranger has robbed them, sent for my dog. You can't at first sight discern that a metamorphosis is underway. Bluntly, the pointless pointer rubs, the best bits blown. Along comes the surgeon who cannot unwound the soldier in an epic known by the names of the nations that have fought for the tools with which the dirt is being thrown into the grave. Think of it, Hamlet driven mad by the political success of the profoundly undeserving. Rice along, sleep appearance, tether mother twin as true bugs, cogitate. The sounds depart from their sources and arrive to warn us that their sources are near. She's had, will have, no leaning with the orange in it, of it. Joe says the blushing sun has said. Jane says Napoleon slept in fits. And Henry says his siblings are all hippopotami, dour and gray. They say that nature never jumps, but nature does. Sun, the sun, the sun. The day comes up from a severed page. Joe has standing whiskers. Jane has a secret. The dancer is ballooning. He's fat and light-footed. He's becoming airborne. Nothing's in his way. How oppressed the young woman is by her mother's image of the happiness that should be hers. Along comes a wave casting spray as it bears, down on a man half asleep on a towel and half awake in a rowboat adrift on a violent sea. The cold in this luminous season stings. Let us go then, you and I, in pajamas through the sky, in which we'll dine on rice and pie, we'll drink from apples made of lace, we'll topple statues, invent space. There in her hand is a slice of bread, its surface just beginning to stiffen. Can we question this? The stars are bits of fire that have broken off from Earth. Like ants, we must make our choices quickly. Death we cannot people, lens, clock, or declare. Thunder here is rare, no matter how thick the air, with things with sides to strike into view. Time's flow is damned, and the past comes back. One more. To begin with, I am faced with mountains to circumambulate, since I can't cut through them. I enter the folds of a human adventure. On every door there hangs a figurehead, and this one comes to face me as the door swings shut. I will proceed with good will, the best of wills, anxiously. Bird of daughters, bird flying from the forks, the blurbs, the cereals, the time. I saw a golden tadpole eating apple jam. I saw a sudden whirlpool sucking down a ham. The boughs grown with fruit and apple falls, false alarm. It's a non sequitur, that. Sense data sinks. The muscles give out mid-word and a thief stutters while accusing me, his uncle, of theft. Loon comes along, mounted on a beast called That, who is neither more nor less than a horse as obedient to Loon as the tides are to the moon. Shot of men hurrying toward each other at an intersection with open umbrellas, none willing to give way to the others. Shot of placid camels kneeling near a chained dog. Shot of sugar maples temporarily obscured by falling snow. Tomorrow morning, unless things vastly improve, I'll go in person to the front of the caravan and take it over the mountain. I thought I saw an earthworm stirring in the dirt. Then I saw it was a sadist wielding a quirt. Thanks.
Thank you, Cecil and Jane, for tonight and for the whole semester to come. There are always secret themes to the readings. Ken Irby, elegies, travel, they all die with me. I'm going to read 3 poems. The first is drawn from the May Day night march in Oakland last year, which I believe is what caused the uncertain ban on night marches. It's called Glass. There were several shattered storefronts. Glass is arrogant, is like small talk, dares you to let it be enough, goes most opaque when clear, most clear when sent opaque, a thing which never totally happens, sign to the eye to ignore what it passes, trespasses, which is that everything you come to is false rim or edge, but still real. Except this night, they fell, or each seemed to as we walked past, not on their own, but right through the doing of others, whereby they chased away the boundaries in a usual self-managing, and now could touch again what presented to the eye. They were cars, I mean the people were, but that's also what they unsaw, into fire and sudden webs of craquelure as we walked past, talked of it as it happened, like weather, small, or at least local, here, come down on both sides, changing nothing into everything, so briefly the clear went clearer, like a sound, or what still keeps you out of a putative store when, the glass gone, its absence hangs, like an instant repair of the law almost running from eye to fingertips, but not there so much, not so much there, as attributed, the difference between standing, looking, and looking as you walk, with others, too many, not enough, while some go out to the edge, where it waits to be crazed. So, on July 13th, 1977, someone named DJ Disco Wiz and his partner Casanova Fly go out on Valentine Avenue in the Bronx to siphon some power and play music in the streets. And they plug in, and as they start to spin records, all of a sudden the lamp posts start going out one by one, and suddenly we're in the New York blackout. During which time, many people went into putative stores and took things. And it's been theorized, and I find it pretty plausible, that a lot of people helped themselves to electronic equipment that allowed them to become DJs and DJ crews, and that's a large part of why hip-hop flourished that summer and thereafter. Redistribution. This poem's called Valentine Avenue, and there are a couple of places in it where there's bracketed language, and I'm going to pause annoyingly portentously for a second to mark when that happens. Valentine Avenue. To close the eyes without doing so, they invented curtains after scenes. Over time, this expands enough, sight goes clear obedience, or its reduction to what's coming next. Planned image sequence. And yet you make of a thing without roof or walls those very same houses you were told not to. Or is that in fact what they are? Places we don't leave, we flee across. Don't blink, but have our eyes put out. Don't go home, but run for, seek asylum in. No one walks through history. Or we don't, but they do. They, verb of motion, serene setting. We is an exaggeration, while they is not. But both are decorous as understatement. The understatement of emergent forms when looking through closed eyes, or the slight nods across difference when the only two on the street. And like the sprawl of twilight, the difference between having and behaving is one I can't inhibit, except in the past tense. So I had to move through devastating space, this one, Oakland, 2015, to reach you by eye, hand, and foot, somehow imagining because I wasn't dead, I was other than devastated, as though by the wish not to be, backed by the fund of my affections, feelings that feel they could survive into a world pre- and post-dating this one. What is that verb for the way somehow moves across a city, say New York, with its lights and areas of concentrated darkness? It would be the same verb we use for the dim work stagehands do during blackouts between scenes, sometimes the actors themselves. And the verb that's appropriate for stealing across the stage, moving objects during blackouts in history, is it still agreed upon racist term? For both stagehands and actors, the question is not yet rhetorical. In 1977, the New York blackout addressed itself once again to the even distribution of night and day, the uneven distribution of resources, allowing people to acquire mixing boards, food, diapers, turntables, jewelry, speakers, jackets, furniture, and records, so that subsequent life and some of its singles could be produced on liberated equipment. This is a version of somehow, still playing out in the streets, say anywhere, meaning here. What kind of house is it that moves over an era, a few bodies a year, a few years at a time? The answer is this. Last one. Experience in groups. Things are worse than they are. The earth returns a usable world. All my cells are pages stamped. Half the time reach comes back with nothing, though everything touches everything else. The sun has gone out in the poem, in both senses of out, all senses of in, or hasn't yet come, or has, too weakly to be felt on the back. Sunlit messaging in the streets makes them look spread with quiet excuses for motion called place. One day hate rhymes with the next. Things stay together, the center can hold. We know a few reasons for this, through which the ones we don't escape. But be calm as green plums in the fridge at the end of August. If only one is left, be tranquil instead. Each feeling departs the time in which it lasts for another point on the graph, another chest in the world. You are a host of the temporary, taking the short view of a long century, already ending, leaving, or left behind. The difference between escape and departure, the difference between command and instruction, between description and praise, praise and assent, assent and complicity, complicity and fold, fold and seam, seam and border, border and line, line and detention at a border, detention and camp, camp and asylum, asylum and detention at a border, detention at a border, and rest, rest and care, care and worry is fog become rain when it hits the pines. Dramatic irony, not knowing things, but not knowing the things you do. And they aren't things, but a time, the jail of the year. What can be done? The dishes somehow are clean. That struggle is over. You can leave the kitchen entirely, without guilt, flick, turn, or pull down the light. It's been one of those lives in a day, repeating vague portions of the new to make time right, but it isn't, filled with objects at the end of the aisle of a stair. So the little collisions, experienced as progress through, but it isn't, it won't. So be patient as the future, things not even yet in the ground. Be ground, though not the one we having are.
John Shoptaw.
Yes. Very happy to be here, and thank you, Cecil, and thank you, Jane, for making this possible, and everyone for coming. I'd like to read just a bit from this book time speech, which has just appeared. I'm happy to see it here. Something maybe I haven't read before up here. So here's a bit of a page from a poem called Ithaca, which was the source of the Mississippi and was reportedly discovered by a man named Schoolcraft. And here he is going through the northern swamps, getting a little turned around. Hieroglyphic paper birch bark, maple, elm, oak forest ceasing. Where the figure of a white man giving way to tamarack marshland, one tongue in his mouth, the second, Schoolcraft finds himself abandoned, forking alongside, interprets to the present, feeble current, peeled and sliced away, unwinding, wandering aimlessly through rushes, forms the light, impermeable skin for wild rice, river flags, tall grasses, slender ribs which, like their paddles, infinitely pliant, pathless, carved like fish, are made from cedar. Labyrinth, the sun, its hammer, rimmed by gunwales, hemi-stitched with showers, soaking blankets, boot wells, flexible young spruce roots, watop, Bible, teal, duck, brand, duck, teal, duck. Following these as tamarack root, ridges leading to depressions, boundlessly as wild rice baskets, hordes of vigilant mosquitoes, joinings looted, rendered water, mosses swallowing their noises, tight by coats of yellow pine pitch, where despondent schoolcraft finds the boiled and thickened gum, they call it, small red whortleberry, low bush, tapering insensibly toward not the high bush, singing, pluck me, stern and bow, till each end coils, eat me, Mariata, let me, violin-like, towards the center, swell your belly, unfulfilling. A couple of new poems. First one called Maud, a name I've always liked. It's got an epigraph from Horace, non omnis moriar, I won't completely die. I was dead, having drowned, yet death in my daughter's dream, being what it is in fantasy, serious, but not all that fatal. I was not totally dead, though I was dying, as though by capsizing into seawater, I'd contracted mortality. My monument almost entirely in the wash, not rocking and inflating on the line. So the dream was funny. It tickled us. It came back to back in gusts at the breakfast table before breakfast, how she hugged the slick gray dock, how she also tucked her feet under my beach quilt and read to me from her phone, kicking herself for forgetting my poetry book. My eyes comically rounded, the better to see what would become of me, groping for my barnacled depth, memorizing all the while each quilted anchor, sail, and musty crest, Beck's anime character and parenthetical narrator voices, for icy toes, each evaporating particular it would not be for me to remember. All three of me grateful to the goddess who grants unwished-for wishes for sparing me my poems. When into my head bobbed the American who'd intoned his way over the North Atlantic on a cattle ship and then walked from Portsmouth to Aldworth House to recite the maudlin monodrama, Maud, come into the garden, Maud, and so on, for the long-suffering laureate who paid the reciter's passage back evermore to America. I was Tennyson, I was Westminster Abbey less, okay, a whole lot less than I was the fanatic of Hallam's memoir, or than Beck the audacious is. The book missing from the bedside was invented. So was the name, identical to mine, on its cover. It remains for me to be hospitable to our family friend, relation of my relations, who more and more survives me, likes to be read to, and likes, on occasion, French toast with Hallam. I mean Hollow. This next one is called A Boxing Match. It's got an epigraph from my fellow Missourian, T.S. Eliot. Humankind cannot bear very much reality. Among the more curious specimens in our verbal menagerie is the ill-matched pair, brutal and humane. we may call a winter brutal, but we most often apply the word to our own kind, whether cruel, crude, vicious, or unvarnished. We don't, though, call a brute brutal, which would be tautological, not to say inhumane. To be humane, compassionate towards humans or animals, is an inclination confined to humans, who might be otherwise. To be inhumane is to be brutal, whereas to be imbrutal is impossible, and, since we have no word for it, unimaginable. And yet, this unmanageable pair alone has the power to carry me back to that night, yoked by violence together, not to Plato's high chariot, but to a rustic hay wagon, the kind me and my date never used to ride, fragrant, prickly, plump to overflowing, drawn by our matchless team, jingling and snorting as though sharing in the excitement, trotting out of time, nodding me off to my Hicktown's summer carnival. In this corner, a he-man, bare-chested, winking at our dates. In that, a brute fact, isolated, unexplained, a she-bear. Her non-retractable claws, if she still had them, gloved in red. Her sublime growl muzzled to a sentimental awe. Her neck, its brown bristles chafed or shaved, collared by a thick leather leash which, passed through an overhead pulley, would snatch her from the jaws of defeat or victory into her next match. Her murky eyes, though, were free to roam or roll. If looked into in the cool light of today, would they reveal traits of her brute creation? Would I detect a lack of reason, akin to insanity, in her failure to grasp why she could never either eat or be eaten? Or an unrelenting cruelty in her soft glaze, which robbed us of a hateful target, excruciating in its pity, which rubbed our noses in our steaming frenzy. Not only the coarse carnies and hooting crowd brutalized by poverty, but squeamish me, my date squeezing my arm, rooting inwardly against my kind for the she-bear to pummel that hairy bully. Could her unfocused looking about foresee my likes, boxing brutes out of sight in veal stalls, farrow crates, and battery cages? I can't say, but I do want to see her imbrutality in her not being able to bear to look at us.
Thank you, audience. Remember on the we have the 1st of October, John Shoptaw will read again for lunch poems. 5th, Ronaldo Wilson will read here, and don't forget to go to the Watershed Festival on the 26th, on my sister's birthday, 26th of September. I'll see you there. Thank you so much.